From Cypress Radio in Cypress, Texas, you've tuned into the Special Ed Section 504 Radio Hour, and I'm your host, Louis Geigerman. Welcome back. Well, friends, this week we're we're bringing back one of our somebody that's been on the show before. I'm bringing back Marcie Lipsitt, and from Michigan. And Marcie's a fellow COPA member, and she's been the founder and co-founder of the Michigan Alliance for Special Ed, which is a grassroots organization that's held 2 rallies in the state's capital.
5 rallies.
What was that?
5.
Oh, 5 rallies. I'm sorry. So what's happened since then?
I've had 3 since the last time that you and I did this, as recently as last October.
I'll be darned. Well, you lobbied for lobbied for an extended school year rule in Michigan special ed administrative rules, along with maintaining severe discrepancy in 2 short-term objectives during the last significant rule promulgation period in 2008.
2014.
2000. Well, why don't you update me what you're doing? I'm reading from your website. Why don't you update me what you've been doing?
So our last big proposed rule promulgation was in 2014, and it was a doozy. It was one that the Michigan Department of Ed had a very short public comment period, 3 weeks, because
wow.
They called it 4. The 4th week was a holiday week in Michigan. And had that package of rules been promulgated, just to give you an example, a child to even be considered under an autism spectrum disorder would have had to fail to make eye contact.
Really?
That was just one of a terrible package of proposed rules. I went to town. I reached out, and actually it was the first time that COPA and the National Center for Learning Disabilities and the Advocacy Institute issued alerts on this package of rules, so it got national attention. Diane Ravitch, the famous education historian, wrote a blog about it. And then I actually filed the first of what since then has become 2,800 federal civil rights complaints on web accessibility, filed my very first complaint alleging the Michigan Department of Education's webpage for this package of proposed rules had accessibility barriers for individuals who were blind and low vision. And
that was under Section 508. Those were 508 complaints.
Those were actually 504 and Title II.
And Title II. Mm-hmm.
And that complaint was opened in 9 days. I've never had a complaint opened so fast by the Office for Civil Rights. It was opened on a Friday when I was at a COPA conference and I was presenting on state complaints. So that was a good Friday.
Yeah.
It took the federal office until June 2015. They found Michigan in formal violation of Section 504 and Title II of the ADA. And the MDE had to take down 9,400 documents and remove barriers and close caption 840 and do training across the department. It led to changes across all of Michigan governmental websites. And Michigan became the first in the nation to have a fully accessible website, the state, especially the state educational agency. And I did stop that package of rule revisions. I got our lieutenant governor involved, who has a child with autism. We had a joint committee for administrative rules hearing that I negotiated with the chairs of that committee. And we put a stop to that package of rules, which was just shock and awe for our Michigan Department of Ed. That led to our lieutenant governor starting, he toured the state and he held meetings to meet with parents of children with IEPs, and learned so much that October, our governor At the time, Governor Snyder started a special ed task force that shockingly I was invited to be on. And we met almost weekly for, it was 5 or 6 months, that led to a package of recommendations. In a similar time period, 2014, I filed a complaint against the Michigan Department of Ed over their complaint procedures, and OSEP found Michigan in violation of IDEA. It's OSEP letter to Lipsitt, September 2015. And that also created shockwaves at the Michigan Department of Ed. So it's been an interesting past couple of years. Our Michigan Department of Ed, I refer to them as the Michigan Department of No Education. And I refer to our state director, Terry Rink, as the Director of Unspecial Education. Conditions are terrible in Michigan. I just filed 2 more questions with OSEP because of stunts that the Michigan Department of Ed pulls. And I call them the Grinch that stole FAPE all the time.
Well, we have some Grinch that stole FAPE down here too, I guess you've heard. So, misery loves company, I guess. It's a race. It's a race to the bottom.
It is a race to the bottom. The difference in Michigan, while Texas had that outrageous stunt with the was it the 8th or 9th percentile? I think it was the 8th percentile.
The 8.5% solution.
8.5. Michigan has the 9th percentile for children with learning disabilities. On a ridiculous pattern of strengths and weaknesses, one mandated data point, a child has to fall at or below the 9th percentile on a norm reference standardized achievement test. This has dropped our percentage of children eligible under what has traditionally been the largest category for students with IEPs. Since they unleashed this set of procedures, May 14th, 2010, it dropped our percentage from 38.5% to 26%. So only 26% of our kids with IEPs, and even that number has dropped, are eligible under a learning disability. And it's not like they've shifted to other categories. The numbers are just dropping. These kids are dropping like flies.
Yeah, yeah.
So that, I'm trying to think if that updates. I'm involved right now. The U.S. Department of Ed Office of Inspector General has a second investigation based on what the Federal Office for Civil Rights has been doing for 3 years with my web accessibility complaints. The first report came out early May. The second one should be coming out, I've been told, days to a couple of weeks. That's been shocking alone, that a federal department of government can pull the stunts that this Federal Office of No Civil Rights, as I refer to them, has been doing. So I always feel like 2 people. I am the advocate for many families that I file civil rights complaints, especially during this period of COVID, for kids' IEPs not being implemented, for 504s not being implemented, and they're all being opened. And many are going to resolution and are being resolved. Districts that are not willing to go to resolution, those are being investigated. And then I'm the activist side, who is fighting with that same Federal Office for Civil Rights over web accessibility in this country. So it's an interesting place to be right now.
Yeah, so sounds like well, certainly you've been keeping the Office of No Civil Rights on their toes, and the Department of Education, the Michigan Department of No Education, on their toes. That's why we're having you.
I am their worst walking nightmare, and I'll never apologize for it.
I love it. I love it. We need to clone you all over the country. Today, what we're going to do, we're really, on this show, we mostly talk about special ed issues primarily, and occasionally we talk the other side about 504, but we're going to really focus today's conversation more into 504 and specifically on accommodating kids going to college. And so that's where we're going to start our conversation today, if that's okay with you.
It's a great conversation, and it's an important one.
For sure. I get calls all the time where individuals, first of all, let's start with the basic nuts and bolts of it. I have um, let's start even before college happens, because in that um, one thing that we should be talking about a little bit for a second is about like the SAT, and preparing for the SAT and preparing for accommodations for the SAT. Now, traditionally, if I'm not mistaken, SAT is required that they have their information per regarding an individual's accommodation for the SAT 7 weeks prior to the actual test. I think that's still the scenario. And isn't that what you understand
I,
as well, or has that changed?
at least in Michigan, I have not seen 7 weeks. I have found that if they have those requests for accommodations within 3 to 4 weeks, that accommodations can be provided.
Well, they may have changed it. I know it used to be 7 weeks, but I mean, but the issue is what is the process for somebody to get their accommodations for the SAT? What do they need to do?
School districts should be meeting with parents and with, in a number of cases, including the students, if they want to go to the meetings, whether it's a 504 meeting or an IEPT meeting, in Texas, an ARD meeting, and talking about applying for accommodations. Parents, unless the student is already 18, will sign a release allowing the school district to release the request for accommodations to SAT and ACT. They only have to do that one time. So if it's a student who's taking the PSAT, which is the practice SAT, or the practice version of the ACT, parents don't have to sign a release every single time a student takes it. They only have to sign it once. If SAT or ACT comes back and rejects, which they shouldn't, because the Department of Justice has been clear that they can't reject accommodations that are in IEPs or 504s. If they do, you go back and you push those supplementary aids and IEPs or those accommodations in 504 plans. I always suggest that you include that students have been using those accommodations on tests and quizzes. That's very important. Every once in a while, I'll get a parent who believes that a child only needs extended time on the college assessments, whether it's ACT or SAT, a child who's never had extended time on a high school final or midterm and has gotten A's and high B's. I struggle to believe that a child ever only needs extended time or accommodations for the SAT or ACT. If the child needs accommodations, they need them on high school tests as well.
Yeah, I agree. Boy, that's really changed, because boy, I remember, God, I remember about 15 years ago, it was just a nightmare working with some people with the SAT. The College Board was just extremely difficult. So I think they've streamlined it considerably back from 15 years ago.
Yeah, there was, prior to the Department of Justice, there were times that I reached out as the advocate to the SAT and ACT and talked to their psychologists and went over the kids' accommodations and was able to push for accommodations. But I had to go that far. And I actually, anytime I did that, it was with the support of the school district. They were so frustrated that they had no issue with an advocate reaching out to the college.
Oh, yeah. I remember they had one person there. I don't want to mention her name because she's probably retired from there, but that person over there was like just a nightmare. And some of her sound bites were just unbelievable. But it was, God, it got ugly. It got ugly back then. But trust me, all that are listening here, it's a heck of a lot easier than it used to be.
Yes, it absolutely is.
It
There's
is.
still school districts that don't know that. They don't know that SAT and ACT have to accept accommodations that are documented in IEPs and 504s.
Right. And that's something that maybe sometimes we need. And, usually, well, what I found down here, the people that are responsible for communicating that are the counselors. And I find a lot of school counselors don't have a clue about 504. They don't have a clue. They don't have a clue about, disability accommodations. So a lot of times those people need to be educated. So really, if you're having like a freshman going into high school, you really should have a conversation and make sure these people understand what needs to be communicated with your kid to the college board to make sure they have the proper documentation
Yeah,
regarding their
I've been
accommodation.
going further the last couple of years. I actually have the counselors at the high school meetings, at the
Yeah,
IEPs.
I think that's vital for sure as we're getting on to do that, because otherwise, they more, I hate to paint with a broad brush, but from my experience, they do not have the knowledge, and they need to be integrated into the child's IEP as soon as you can.
At the college
Anyway,
level as well, as we're talking about college, the college counselors, in fact, what I have found interesting about that is when a student has accommodations and it's with the disability office, disability affairs, whatever that college calls it,
ODA, Office of Disability Services is, yeah,
there are different names in different colleges, but the
yeah,
counselors in those offices know who the better counselors are for all
they do,
students.
they do, they do. So it's important to be able to reach out to know who they are. They can be a very definite ally. So that's a really good point, though. Integrate them into the process as well. So with that in mind, okay, so I get calls. I probably got more calls recently regarding needs from students that that were requiring accommodations at the college level than I have had in years. And I don't know if it's COVID. I don't know what it is, but it's happened. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today. So, you have a student that's had, as you said, Marcie, that's had accommodations they've been using at the high school level. What basically, when you're looking at a unit, well, first thing I would talk about, when we have a student wanting to go to a university, I don't know how you feel about it, but one of the first things I tell parents is like, okay, your child wants to go to, such and such a school. Okay, great. When you have challenges, um, I still think something that's very, very important when you're looking at a university, you got to look at the entire, from the place to live to, the curriculum that the place, the city you're going to be in, et cetera. But to me, the culture of the campus to me is so important, and how welcoming they are, and how they try to um, help individuals that may have challenges. I found that culture is really important, and you can tell by, it's like going into a bar or a restaurant. You can tell the ambiance by walking in there to know how they deal with individuals with challenges. And I think that's really an important issue. What do you think?
Oh, no, I agree. You want to look for colleges and universities that are not only just going to be welcoming, are going to consider the student a regular student
Yeah.
attending the college, and that simply requires accommodations. So you're not always necessarily looking at all of the schools. And there are times that when I'm talking to a student, I have to say, you know what, I think you might not want to consider this particular school because I think you will find it a constant battle. Uh, I've had situations where I've been brought in after a student is already in a college, and these are really Ivy League and very elite private colleges and very, very, very bright kids who still, some of them need accommodations. They have ADHD, they have dyslexia, and I run into situations where these colleges are not welcoming at all. Professors violate the accommodations in these accommodation plans, and then students are forced to file federal civil rights complaints. And even then, some of the colleges want to resolve them quickly, and others could care less. And if a college doesn't care about 504 ADA, that is not a college that you want a child who has needs for accommodations attending.
I totally agree. I hate, I've been thinking about, do I want to pick on them? I do. I'll tell you one right now. I have somebody that I know wanted to go to Baylor University here in Texas, and this young man has a mobility issue. As a matter of fact, his challenge is he doesn't have arms or legs. Okay, so he needs to have an attendant that helps him out, for what he does. And guy's brilliant, but he's got those challenges. And so what he wanted to do was he needed to have his attendant with him, naturally, for his personal needs, but he also wanted to take in the college experience, and through when we're talking about staying in the dorms, we're talking about residential life, okay, which is as important as going to classes. And so in this situation, he wanted to have a roommate, okay, and go, be able to, get a roommate picked, okay, through their roommate picking system, okay. And so at the same time, he wanted to have effectively a 2-bedroom dorm that he would have the roommate with him he would have the attendant with him in his room, right? That would be in his room with him. And then the other room would have the roommate. And basically, the university said no. They said, we only allow one of two scenarios. If you want to have a roommate, you can have a roommate, but your attendant cannot stay overnight with you. Cannot stay overnight with you. Or you can have your attendant with you, and that's the thing you could do, but you can't do the other. So in essence, what the university was doing was discriminating against him by not allowing him to be able to utilize the roommate system. And that's a travesty. Shame on you, Baylor.
Had he been accepted to Baylor?
He had been accepted to Baylor.
I would have had them put that in writing, and I would have filed a federal civil rights complaint.
Well,
and go to a different college. I would have done them with a big federal civil rights complaint.
Well, that may still happen. I think there's a large likelihood. There is a fair likelihood that there will be a suit will be filed. He has enrolled. The problem is, this is for this semester, okay? And so he did not have time to, he went to another university, yes. He's been accepted at other universities, and he's starting in a couple of weeks. But there's a very good likelihood that there will be some kind of filing. But I'm just telling you, it gets back to the cultural issues. I mean, that is blatant to me. That's about as blatant discrimination as you get.
It's disgusting.
It is, and it really angers me. And the young man on top of it is a advocate too. And so it's really, but it's disgusting. And but I'm just telling you that's what's out there. So the problem is, unfortunately, when you file a federal suit, that takes time.
But I would
And
file a suit. I'd file a U.S. Department of Ed Office for Civil Rights Administrative
I
complaint.
no, well, that's something that probably will be done too. But that, of course, that takes a month of Sundays for them to rectify that. But more than likely, there will be an OCR complaint. Actually, I think there may actually be a suit filed. It's that egregious, and go from there. And let the court see, hey, is this discrimination or not? I think it's pretty clear, but that's my view. But anyway, the point of that conversation, though, is that issues regarding accommodations don't just deal with academic accommodations, it's also in residential life. Things like having like a single room, or things like having a roommate like this. These are all part of issues that are accommodations that have to be considered. So I just start that as a current issue. But let's talk about what the process is if somebody wants to get needs an accommodation from a university. What is the first thing that they should do?
After they've been accepted, after they've
Yes,
decided this is the right college,
yes.
and it's a little different with different colleges. Sometimes it's going online and it is filling out a request for accommodations, and they tell you they need specific paperwork. And then it's scheduling an appointment with a counselor in that Office of Disability Services. If they don't require that and you can simply call and schedule, then you call and you schedule an appointment with a counselor in that office.
Under COVID, there may be different procedures now.
Right. Over the last year and a half, it's been through Zoom, it's been through various virtual platforms. And that alone brings some challenges depending on the accommodations, because we know that a lot of these federally funded websites, whether they're school district, colleges, universities, are not fully accessible. So
Oh, absolutely.
that can be another challenge.
That exacerbates the problem right there, for sure.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I had kids that didn't have Zoom all year and or didn't have closed captioning on Zoom, and they have hearing impairments.
Well, one of the things what we need to do is we need to give them the paperwork, basically, in these conversations with the disability service people, they need have some documentation to show that there have been specific accommodations that the student has had.
They need the current 504 plan or current IEP or current health plan, depending on the needs of the child. Right now, while this is being fought out again in the Department of Justice, they do need relatively current evaluations. So like right now, I have a psychologist, I have a student that's coming in from another state. I was able to get one of our leading neuropsychologists to squeeze in and do an evaluation next week.
Oh, that's great.
So that can be a problem that there isn't a current enough, I run into that often, that there isn't a current enough evaluation and there isn't enough time to even have the school district do a new evaluation. That can be problematic. And
Right,
that, that's a challenge. I'm hoping
yeah.
that gets fixed and that parents don't need to expend dollars, or even if insurance is covering it, the kids don't have to go for comprehensive evaluations, especially if they shouldn't be necessary, that there's enough documentation.
Well, you and I are working on a case right now where we have a kid that's just been accepted and to college in Michigan, and the last assessment though was done in 8th grade. Well, we're going to have an updated assessment, to provide to the university and get that turned around pretty quick. But it's important for them to have current
That's actually being
assessment.
done next week.
Huh?
That's being done next week.
Oh, it's that. Oh, okay. So you already heard that. So okay. So it's in the mix.
But
So that's good.
it can take a very trained advocate to get that kind of help, because we all build relationships with, I have a huge toolbox of clinicians that I work with, and I know the ones that I can reach out, and they will make time that isn't there if I have what I call a 911, a real important evaluation that has to be done.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. Me too. So anyway, that's important. So having current assessment data and that's important. But when you sit down, so we have the sit down or virtual sit down, however it is today. When we have that conversation with the ODS people, what do we talk? What kind of things should the student be? Oh, well, there's something else we need to be talking about too. There's something, when we say we, it really should be the student, unless student needs some help, in articulating it. But you know how the disability service people look at parents. They use the term helicopter parents. You know, that
Lou, I get around that by suggesting to parents, even for kids that are bright and neurotypical, they're still 18 years old,
yep.
that parents get an education power of attorney.
I always recommend that too.
And then I recommend and help them understand why parents can be documented on an accommodation plan, so that parents can have access with a student when a student is having a problem with a particular professor or with a counselor, or the student wants parents involved. If parents are documented as an accommodation, and I got that one directly from one of the regional Office of Civil Rights attorneys years ago, just make the parents an accommodation.
That's a great point. That's a really salient point. I generally always get them to get a power of attorney as part of that to assist. But but being part of the accommodation I think, is essential. I think that's a great point. So the issue though is, you're also I've heard, I mean, one thing I've heard, and that's another reason why the power of attorney is important, because with records, they'll say, oh, well, the child's 18 under the Family Educational Rights Privacy Act, parent can't get access to the records. That's not true.
That's not
Uh,
true.
it's not true. For one thing, if a person hasn't been emancipated and they're still considered a dependent, they should be able to get those records anyway.
Yes.
But the I will tell you, the college people don't know that. They don't understand it. Although the language in FERPA actually says that they may have the records. It doesn't say they have mandamus language, which is something to think about. But when you have a power of attorney, I think that kind of short circuits that and make sure they're able to get access to the records, which can be
Parents have to think of it as a power of attorney for medical reasons. It's
right.
exactly the same thing. You're simply calling it an education power of attorney. It covers the same
Exactly.
issue.
Totally agree. Totally agree. So anyway, okay, we have to sit down with them. Okay. And we talk about what kind of things should, well, obviously they'll talk about accommodating the student for, here are the accommod
Lou, do you want to stop for 1 second and I can get someone to help with my dog?
oh, the joys of doing Zoom. No, the joys of doing interviews at home. Yeah, you got dogs.
I have.
Anyway, yeah. Well, so what kind of, I mean, so as I said, one of the things that your ODS person can help you with as well, I keep using the term Office of Disability Service ODS person. Also, you want to try to get somebody that really, you may be to assign to somebody, but they may not be the brightest light. They may not be the best person, to help. And you most of the time you have an option of getting, of changing your rep. But one of the things that that rep should be able to do is they're supposed to know their campus. And they're also supposed to know one thing, if you've got somebody that's particularly that really understands their campus, they also understand the professors. And what's the old saying? What's the difference between God and a professor? You know the answer to that,
I
Marcie?
don't.
God doesn't think he's a professor.
Well, and you're raising, I'm going to jump in here because one of
Yeah,
the things that I find pretty chronically is that these counselors in these offices of disability services or affairs or whatever they call that department
yeah.
believe that there is a finite list of accommodations when it is infinite. It's like when you and I deal at the K-12 level and a student has a 504 and needs time in a resource room. And a special ed administrator says, well, I can't do that. That this student doesn't have an IEP. And I say, yes, you can. Under 504, you can provide any special education service. The student doesn't have goals and objectives. So you're dealing with the same thing at the college level. They like to make students and students' parents believe that the list of accommodations is finite. Like your example with Baylor, we can't have that attendant and a roommate. That's outrageous. I run into all the time that students can't have note takers in class or assistants in class, like paraprofessionals. Of course they can. So the first thing that I think I find myself doing is one, testing the water. How much does this counselor know about the infinite number of accommodations? Or how hard am I going to have to educate this counselor on the fact that what this child needs, has been receiving at the K-12 level, is absolutely still appropriate. Things like getting an hour to 2 hours of tutoring per class per week. And I just had a mother who said, my child needs a note taker. He has a visual processing speed standard score that's in the 60s, which is really, really low, especially for a really bright child. And I will lay in front of a train for a note taker. I said, you won't have to get on a train, let alone lay in front of one to get a note taker. That is an accommodation that we will have no problem getting. So I find that it's when you're looking at the culture, how much do they understand about the infinite number of accommodations that are available to students who need them and who have had a record of them?
I totally agree. You always start with, well, it's like, oh, we don't do that. So that's,
I love that.
we've never done that before. I said, well, there's always a first time, but let's bear down on that. Is that your policy, or, well, we just never done that before? Well,
That doesn't mean it's right. And I have had to say that at times. You know, if you need a class on 504 and ADA, and it's important to know that both laws exist, because 504 is for colleges and universities that accept federal money. Private colleges that don't still have to be in compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And both provide infinite accommodations.
yeah, and the language is similar,
Very
very similar between ADA and 504. Making reasonable accommodations. But I get back to the issue. So absolutely, you want to find out what the knowledge is of this, what the person that you're dealing with. But that person should also know what's going on with the campus and could help you with professors that would be more, that are more open to help out students. Part of the problem is you got professors that are tenured and it's hard to get rid of them, right?
very
So
hard.
it's very hard. So the issue is, if you know people, that if they know the right people and the professors that are really more willing and workable with students, that's really gold to have that. And a good ODS person is going to be able to do that.
Well, and that good Office of Disability Affairs counselor, again, will also know the counselors in the more general ed, the counselors for all students. Who are the counselors that are more knowledgeable about professors?
Why don't we,
They're equally golden.
absolutely. Okay. Why don't we talk about the types of accommodation? I mean, like you said, it's infinite, but let's talk about, I mean, you mentioned note-taking assistants. Okay. That, or I'll offer one. You have um, have a test being taken, individual administration in a test center. They can do that. What other types of accommodate or extended time is another possibility. Why don't let's talk about the different most common accommodations that we see at the college level.
Sure. So the extended time on tests and quizzes, the not just extended time, but testing with an actual person that can read the test to you, read the test questions, can provide the test accommodations, also in a very
They
quiet.
could be a scribe as well.
You can have a scribe. You can have someone who bubbles in answers. You can have testing one-on-one in a quiet room.
How
You
about
don't,
recording of lectures?
oh, absolutely. Lectures can be recorded. That's where things like smart pens become very, very, very helpful. I don't think they're as helpful at the K-12 level, but at the college level, they can be. But you can also have that person in the room. You can have a person that at a K-12 level would be called a paraprofessional. You can have adult support in a college class for a student. And there are times that that becomes necessary. If you have a note taker, then you already have someone that's there and can ensure that if you have other kinds of processing issues and you need someone to repeat what a professor has said. You need clarification.
How about reduced course load?
Reduced course load, you're saying within the course itself?
Well, I
Or
mean,
taking fewer classes at a time?
exactly.
That can be done, but that can be done at the college level for virtually every student. That's more of a universal than it is just for kids that have accommodations. Um, so can that be done? That one should be an easy one to accomplish if that is needed, especially because you can stretch college out.
One that you and I talked about before, we had a little dialogue before we went on air, was course substitutions. And let's say that you have a student that has a like dyscalculia, okay, calculia, and or that has a math, that has a math disability, and um, their degree plan requires a math course. Now, okay, let me step back. So let's say that if you have a kid that has a student that is taking a science, let's say they're pre-med or they're a chemistry major, you're going to have to take the math class that's in the degree the degree requirement, because it could be argued that's a vital part um, of the degree plan. Okay. But let's say that on the other side, you have an individual that's taking a business major. Okay. And you have a math requirement, but unless again, it's one thing if it's a science major, it's another thing if it's something like a business major, or let's say like you're an English major, you may not necessarily have to take the college algebra or pre-calculus. Sometimes you can get those if it's not an essential part of that degree plan. You can substitute that class with like a statistics class,
Or
which
an
is
econ class.
yeah, like a statistics class, which would be different. So there's possibility for substitution, but in the event, in the case where you're looking for a class substitute for, for it to be substituted, I mean, that disability, I mean, you do have to show um, documentation of that actual disability, meaning, whether you have dyscalculia, et cetera. But obviously it wouldn't be a reasonable accommodation if the actual degree plan was like chemistry or pre-med or something like that, because that's an essential part of that curriculum.
Yeah, and we all want kids, whether they have disabilities or not, to go towards a degree or a major that lends itself to your abilities and talents and interests. So I've never had a student that has had dyscalculia or math disability that has wanted to go into a field of math.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one student that had that issue, and that just for the life of her, she just couldn't pass the math class.
Well,
Yeah.
there are other options though. I've had situations where some kids have wanted to take, for example, that algebra class, are not quite ready, and will back it up and take a class that doesn't count towards a major to be prepared to take that algebra class. You can go back and take a
Like a
pre-algebra
remedial,
class,
like a
like a
remedial class.
remedial, or you can simply take that class once for no credit and practice it
Right.
and then take it for credit. On the flip side, for kids in ELA, there are some professors that are so accommodating and open to having students that have learning disabilities that they will provide alternate assignments. So for a student that is going to struggle with a really lengthy writing assignment, they will substitute as long as the student can demonstrate knowledge on the content and skills that professor is looking for. They will provide alternate assignments. So again, that's where finding the right professor becomes so important. Just today, my son
Yeah.
is he just had lunch with a professor he hasn't had in 2 years, who had the most wonderful relationship with. They're having lunch today. And finding those professors it's just golden for a child. It
Well,
can be,
that's
that professor can be so encouraging.
absolutely. I mean, that's also true for K through 12. I mean,
Yeah.
having the right teacher, but the issue is, but too often, well, that's where again that ODS person, that disability service person, can be helpful to help funnel you toward those professors that are helpful.
More at the 4-year college university than at the community college level. The community colleges are seeing such attrition with retirements, and some of it is because they're bringing in less expensive professors. There's such a revolving door right now that sometimes they don't even know who's going to teach the course when you register for it. The community college has become quite a problem.
Yeah, that is a problem. Yeah, I mean, but again, tenured professors is a totally different, a totally different animal. And if if you can finding that gem of that professor that will, and particularly in the area where the kid's struggling, in the area, that particular area that it struggles, and you have a professor that will work with alternative assignments. Man, that's great. And I think once again it gets back to the original theme that we talked about. It's about the culture of the campus.
Yes.
That cannot be overemphasized. That is an absolutely essential issue that you don't go by a what you don't do is go solely by a university's tradition and being being well being a great educational facility or regarded as a great educational facility, you need to peel back the onion.
It's same
And
with K-12. K-12, just because a district is a wealthier, more economically stable district does not mean it is a good district for children with disabilities. It can be just the opposite.
I
Ann
would
Arbor
not,
has the University of Michigan, and the Ann Arbor Public Schools is terrible for children with IEPs.
and I would say that and you cannot, well, a good source is if you had a broad base of parents that with kids with similar challenges that have had good experience. That's a lot. That's a lot of times I find that's helpful. If you're looking at just a basic, gen ed, or a kid, or a student that doesn't have any challenges, information from those parents are not going to be valuable to you. They're not.
No.
You need, but actual students that are going to that university with, I mean, like for instance, boy, I remember, dealing with the students with autism spectrum disorders. You know, you can, talking to other students and parents that are actually in the program, they can give you a better insight of actually how the school is actually handling their issues better
Well,
than
and
anybody.
is it a college or university that is welcoming children on the
Right,
autism spectrum and has a peer-to-peer program, has
right,
social skills groups, has
right,
those supports that they're building,
right.
because it's relatively new, welcoming children that are very bright with autism. Um, and you want a college or university that is again welcoming. The key is, does the university welcome all children?
Absolutely. It kind of reminds me of a quick story. Well, maybe it isn't so quick, but you've heard of a head, right? You know what that is, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So down here, that they have, AHEAD is basically an organization of disability, Office of Disability Service people, okay, across the country. They also have individual chapters.
Right.
Well, way back when, I had this idea that what they needed, and this was before they were having the real avalanche of the students in the spectrum attending the universities. This was just before the storm, right? And I had talked to the state, um, um, AHEAD conference, and I joined them. I decided to be a community member, which they didn't have any at that time.
Oh, that's interesting.
They didn't have any at that time. And so they were intrigued about my background, and I did a presentation to them. And my premise though was, you guys are you're at the precipice of having an avalanche of students in the spectrum attend your universities, and you need to be ready for it. But by and large, a lot of these kids are not ready for residential life with the universities. They're not, because they haven't been given the training by the K through 12. And I basically, and make a short story long, I said, well, here's the deal. You can partner with the schools, um, you can partner with the schools over a summer. If there's a service they can provide as in-home training, and use that to help, over a 2-week period, where they do a dry run at the dorms and maybe audit some classes in the summer. Okay. And then they can be overseen by the K through 12. Your dorms primarily, by and large, are not as crowded. If you have any students there at all in the summer, here's a way for you to get some money for a couple of weeks, and then allow these students to actually see what coursework is like, and also get a handle, um, of where they're going to have some problems, whether it's on residential life or working in the university. And you can do a dry run and do that. And so it would generate money for the university, but it would also help us. This would also help reduce a potential problem that you would have when the student actually comes on your doorstep and gets accepted.
You know, Lou, you're raising something we haven't touched on. I want to make sure we do touch upon it. One of the things that I have been doing for the last few years at the K-12 level, teachers love to say to students, especially kids that have ADHD and learning disabilities, you need to be your own advocate. And my question is, has anyone ever talked to this child about Section 504 and the ADA?
That's
And of
in
course, they
every
never have.
that's in every transition plan I do.
Every
Every
transition
single one.
plan, every transition plan has to have instruction on Section 504 and ADA. And I go further and I include that there will be a phone call with an attorney in the regional office where that child lives, that you talk to the Office of Civil Rights. And
That's a good idea.
we want these kids to understand, because I can be very sarcastic about it. You want the child to advocate and understand a right to accommodations, but this child's never heard of Section 504 or the Americans with Disabilities Act. I add things like reading Martin Luther King's letter from the Alabama jail. You know, I really push the whole civil rights side of this with the kids when they're starting in junior high and then always in high school.
Well, so with my scenario, and absolutely, I insist that they do that and they have training. I haven't had them call the OCR office, but that's a good idea. Of course, the problem is it's hard to get anybody to answer the phone over there. But anyway, but you if you set it up, probably you have a better shot. Even though they're got a gazillion caseload, but you know how that is. But no, so in this thing where I with the university, I suggested, okay, you can do this dry run,
Sure.
and it would give you an idea, you know, it would help. But I said, trust me, this will help you later on. Oh, I was slammed for that. By the way, I had an overfilled room in there. I mean, it was jammed, right? But they said I was, and I said, look, the schools haven't done the right thing. And they were saying, oh, you're bashing schools and all this crap. I got really, really bad marks. And they said I was unrealistic. Well, but here's what was funny about it. And unbeknownst to me, okay, I have put my disclaimer. Marshall University was effectively doing the same thing with their schools in with West Virginia, and that the same thing that I had proposed. So I was, you know, it's always the idea when you're the first guy to have the idea, they're going to say it doesn't make sense, it's stupid, whatever. That's what happened. But you know, now have I seen schools do that since? No, but Marshall I know had done it. But I'm just saying, the ahead people, you really, with the ODS people, there a lot of times needs to be an educational part of it
They
that
do.
really is important.
And it takes people like us who are going to push and push and push. And hearing
That I
no
do.
is my favorite word, because it just means I have to turn it into yes, and I have to educate. So it's the pushing. The pushing can be very hard. There are days that it feels like it's futile. It never is. Yet we have to keep pushing. You know, I do what I do as an advocate. I tell everyone, not one child ever asks to be born. No one has a choice. We are plopped on this planet. And going further, we aren't given a choice of who our parents are or where we live. And why should any of that drive the quality or lack thereof of an education and a child's opportunities going into post high school and the work world? And disability is the same thing. That child without the arms and legs never asked to be born. That child deserves every opportunity and more to reach that child's potential. And with encouragement, if he's simply hearing from the party of no, then he's in the wrong party.
Yeah, no, I think that's an absolutely another salient point. And I think, you know, it's really important to push through when somebody says no, to push through that no and really dig deeper into it. It's look, ADA was passed, what, 1990, 1991, right? 1991. And we still have a long way to go on that, right?
Oh, a very long, I mean,
We have a long way to
especially
go.
right now, the Office of Civil Rights is a mess from the previous administration. It needs a housekeeping. There are long-time
House
employees that
cleaning,
need to,
house cleaning.
yes, they need to be fired or retired. There are some staffers that have to go. They were drinking out of toxic Kool-Aid for 4 years, and
Yeah, but the
there's some
same,
rebuilding.
well, with that same thought though, I mean, ODS people need to be educated.
Yes,
They certainly can be, thing to be thinking about is they can be your ally. Okay. And it will, A, I would try to probe and find out who is the most experienced in that office, and
yes, always.
somebody that's workable. Let's come up. Let's just say this as we're because we're almost done with the hour, believe it or not. But the the most important issues here. What are the most important issues encapsulating what we were saying before that a student should look at when they're going to a particular university?
Well,
Number
first,
one,
one, they should have all of their documentation in order so that they are prepared. Um, and then while they're looking at these different colleges and universities, looking at the culture, do some reading, go online and search professors and
the
really,
good schools will put you on. The schools that are really open will, I mean, while they won't give you the names of parents to call, but what they will do is, I know a number of the universities that will actually say, hey, um, I will have them contact you, that
yes,
they're on a list, that are open about it, that really want to help. There are schools that will do that.
you just want a good match. You want to find a child that has significant physical needs. You don't want to talk to the parent of a child that has dyslexia. I mean, you want to try to match and talk to parents that are sharing the same experiences and have children that have similar needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, believe it or not, Marcy, we actually did an hour. Did it seem like it was an hour? I
It
don't
never
know.
seems like an hour because you and I could go on for years.
Yeah, for sure. Well, listen, Marcy, I really want to thank you for coming on the show with us
Oh, thank you for having me.
again. Well, we'll do it again. I love having you as a guest. If somebody wants to contact you up in Michigan, how would they do that?
They can go. I have a website, marcielipsitt.com, and Marcie is Marcie, and my last name Lipsitt. So it's just marcielipsitt.com. I have Facebook pages and I respond to all messages. I have the Special Education Wall of Shame. I have in Michigan, the Michigan Alliance for Special Education. I have an advocate page. So there are definitely ways to reach me. And I respond. I receive emails from people I've never met. I always respond.
You and I ought to, next time I do a good, bad, and the ugly, I think I'll have you on to join our group here, and which would go into the wall of shame deal, and we'll have fun with the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Lou, I filed successfully a complaint against Douglas County School District. It was open for 98 kids 2 weeks ago. I'm happy to share the good, and same thing down in New Mexico. I'm happy to share. I have that page for a reason. It's a very serious page with a funny name.
Well, let's do that next time I do the good, bad, and the ugly. Well, anyway, thanks for being on the show. This is Louis Geigerman with National Art IEP Advocates. If you need to get my email me, it's National ARD Advocates with an S at gmail.com. National Art Advocates at gmail.com. If you want to have questions or suggestions for the show, go to spedradio103.5 at gmail.com, spedradio103.5 at gmail.com. You can tweet me at Louis Narda, Louisnarda. The archives, some of the archives are up on the website in Cypress, in the Facebook page of Cypress Radio. Actually, I have a YouTube channel now, Sped Radio channel, that we have this. Actually, this will be a video that you can look up, and I'll post it up there, so y'all can watch that. And you can actually see my face than just my voice. And anyway, the Cypress Radio is, works by donations. And so you go to the Cypress Radio webpage and put in any amount, and that keeps the lights on and keeps the show going. So I hope you all will consider that. I once again want to thank my guest, Marcie Lipsitt, for coming on the show, which we'll do again. And I guess I'll see you all on the radio and the internet. Have a great week.